Thank you everyone for joining us here tonight. We have looks like a number of attendees, a lot of you on video and a good number on the phone as well. So glad to see that. My name is Danielle Wood and I work with Civic Mike. The city hired Civic Mike to assist in the public engagement efforts for your community. We've talked with many of you. I see a lot of familiar names on here on the phone, through Facebook, email. The point of this meeting is to provide information and get feedback from as many of you as possible. If you guys can hear that, that's just people coming into the waiting room. Pablo will be letting them in here over the next couple minutes, but the city is working to make sure that they're representing your voice with whichever decision is recommended. So that's why this process is taking place. This is our second meeting. We were hopeful that COVID-19 restrictions would be lifted and we would be able to have this meeting in person, but obviously that didn't happen. So if this is your first time participating in a large meeting or on the phone or video, there's a few ground rules that I'd like to cover to ensure everyone, we respect everyone's time and personal viewpoints. So in the interest of time, that's why we got started pretty close to 6:30 here. We're going to try and keep the meeting to under an hour and a half. The meeting will be recorded and shared on civicmike.com, but we don't want people to have to leave the meeting and miss some really important information that may take place at hour 3. So that's why we're trying to keep it to an hour and a half. We will hold questions until the end of the presentations. If you have questions, write them down, or if you're on the computer, at the bottom of the screen, you can type them into the chat. There's a chat button there, you can type them in. At the end of all the presentations, we will cover questions that have been submitted online through the online chat and then respond to phone questions. And then finally, there are a few people, well, a couple people that submitted questions prior to the presentation that we will address then. So to finish the meeting in a timely manner, we may have to answer some questions on an individual basis after the meeting concludes, but we will try and get everyone to be able to speak tonight. Once we get to the questions portion of the meeting, I'll quickly go over acceptable behavior for each of the different sections, the chat and the phone. And a meeting of this size, as Pablo mentioned, can quickly be derailed by background noise from multiple participants. So Zoom tried to address that with some of their technology, but it's just not there yet. So we want everyone to be able to hear what's being presented. During the presentations, all participants will be muted. Please respect others and stay on mute so everyone can hear the presentations. The Civic Mike public engagement process aims to gather feedback from various demographics with diverse values. We'd like to hear from all of you, all participants, and we make every attempt to shield each of you from personal attacks or slander. Anyone using foul language or making personal attacks will be moved to a private meeting room by the moderator to regain composure. If unacceptable behavior continues after returning from the private meeting room, that individual will be removed from the meeting and not permitted to return. I don't think that that will happen. We had a very successful meeting last time. Everyone was cordial and respected each other. So thank you all that participated then. That was exactly what we're looking for tonight, and I think we'll have. So we do want to hear everyone's opinions, and we won't allow anyone to disrespect you for having different views. With that being said, we will go ahead and start the presentation. We have a welcome from Rachel Molina, the Deputy City Manager from the City of Hesperia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for our second outreach meeting. As Danielle said, we are intending to encourage our residents to share with us, and we appreciate you having done so over the past several months. Earlier in the year, we conducted a survey, and a lot of participation was given from our residents who live around the golf course, and we went through those survey results. And so this meeting is to pick up where we left off. The City of Hesperia has moved forward with a CFD proposal in your area. However, I wouldn't characterize it as the city is advocating for this CFD, but rather we are looking for our residents' input on the golf course and what the best future is for our community and for this project. So as part of my welcome, I wanted to share briefly history of ballot measures in Hesperia. Hesperia incorporated in 1988, and since incorporation, there have been a variety of ballot measures put forward to the voters, and I'll go through them. We had a ballot measure in 1992 that was for fire protection district assessment, and this measure failed. We had an ordinance proposed for a daytime curfew in Hesperia back in the late 90s, 97. That measure failed. We had another fire tax the special tax was placed on the ballot to ask voters if they were interested in, again, a fire tax to the fire protection district. That measure failed. However, voters did approve a measure in 2004 in support of a Native American casino. So I don't know if any of you remember that measure in the city, but that one actually passed. And the voters in Hesperia also passed a measure that same year to install a transient occupancy tax in the city. So that allows our hotels here in the city to collect tax from the people that are staying with us for a brief time. There was an additional public safety measure sought in 2011. It was a parcel tax of $85 with a 5-year sunset. That measure failed. And then finally, voters passed Measure T in 2018, a tax on cannabis sales. So overwhelmingly, we haven't brought forward that many proposals, but most of those that have been presented to the voters have been turned down. And I share that with you because the taxes that were sought in the past were public safety focused. Other measures like the curfew had nothing to do with revenue. But this is a CFD, and the city, again, is not necessarily advocating for it, rather than interested in engaging with the residents to see if this is important to them. And Casey and our other presenters will get into the funding increment that we have, tax increment that we have available to the city, and how that plays into providing city services. So I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you for giving your time. Thank you for your engagement in our Facebook page that Civic Mike has been facilitating, and all the questions that you've brought forward. We really appreciate the time that you've taken and the suggestions that you've brought forward. Some of those we'll be addressing tonight. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. Now I am going to cover some of the outcomes of the public engagement process. So like Rachel mentioned, this process is aimed to evaluate support for the special tax to keep funding, or to fund keeping the Hesperia Golf and Country Club open. So we know this picture here, you know, Rachel asked me about this. It says, keep it open. We know that many members of the community support keeping it open. It's not, that's not the question at hand, but most of you support keeping it open. but some of you do not support funding the maintenance and operations through a special tax, and some of you do. So as previously discussed, the special tax has been determined to be the only feasible funding option at this time. A citywide isn't something that we're planning to look at now, but that can be discussed in a little more detail later. So the main consensus of this group is to keep the course open. In addition to golf, there's still many interests for keeping the course open. The following list is a list of benefits provided by members of the community. So all of you, we didn't create this list, but some of those items are great recreational activity, we know, golf, but what else? So we've got great views, quiet and peaceful community, better atmosphere, limited traffic, increased property values, lower crime due to golfer presence, great for local economy, historical course. I think, everyone values that, and a beautiful location for events. So this special tax can only be approved by 2/3 vote in favor of the ballots received. This is an opportunity for registered voters to decide if the special tax is the correct solution for keeping the course open. This is the best type of democracy. So oftentimes you have elected officials that come up with a way to solve a solution, and you get to vote if you think that's accurate, but you don't get to participate in the process like we're doing here. So what we're doing is, the city's goal is to have as many participants in the community as possible to get the special tax terms to be what the community designed, what the community is comfortable with if they decide to approve the special tax. So what do we need included in the special tax if you were even going to consider supporting it, which you still may not? So through the public engagement process, the last community meetings, social media, direct calls, I've talked to a lot of you on the phone, emails, we have been able to gather feedback and adjust the original special tax funding plan to accommodate a lot of those requests. So the following list here that you see is a list of items that the city has addressed. Now we're going to go through each of these, but remember, a final survey will be sent out to the community with each of these items listed to determine if there is consensus to include these items in a special tax that will be voted on. So this information has been shared on civicmike.com. For those of you who are signed up to get updates from us, we've shared a lot of this information, but tonight we wanted to go over it, explain each item, allow those who haven't seen it to see it, and allow you to ask any questions. So when you get your survey and make the final decision, you'll fully understand what each of these items represent, and then you can make a decision if that should be included in the special tax package that you may or may not support. So let's start with the expansion of the proposed boundaries. We did have a request to expand the boundaries. There was zone 1 and 2 shown there with the pink and blue, and those were already included at the first meeting. For all of you from zone 3 that are joining us tonight, welcome. There was a request to expand the boundaries, so we went back and worked with the city to find an additional area that could be included, and that is zone 3, the orange parcels there. That's an additional 237 parcels. So this resulted in just over 17% reduction in rates for the individuals that were already in zone 1 and 2. Next slide, Pablo. So those individuals, with zone 3, you will have the opportunity to vote just like zones 1 and 2. We sent out a survey for zone 3 to ask the same questions that we asked from the zone 1 and zone 2 community members to get feedback on and your input on this process as well, to kind of catch everyone up to speed. Also, we discussed including a sunset provision. This was really important to a number of you, that you didn't want to pay into a special tax that could last for 30 years, or longer. And also some of you, have concerns about having a sunset, something like 5 years that you would pay into, and then 5 years this could be gone and the money you spent, the golf course closes anyway. So those are both two very valid concerns, but the city is willing to consider a sunset after a short period of time if that is what the community wants, knowing that if a new funding source is not put in place after 5 years, then the recommendation to close the course may still be the same. Also, a set inflator, there was some concerns about not knowing how much the special tax would increase on an annual basis if it was tied to a number that could fluctuate. So the city has took into account that concern and has decided to put a flat 2% inflator, so everyone can plan accordingly for what your special tax rate would be each year. Also, revenue sharing agreement was something that was brought up by a handful of you, and I know that many of you that brought that up were planning to meet with others to talk about that. And this is something that the city is happy to include as well. Like I said, all of these items will be included in the final survey before they get put in the packet. But this is what's a revenue sharing agreement. So if the golf course revenue exceeds projections, the city has proposed the distribution application of excess funds will be in the following manner. So 40% would be applied to as a credit the following year for the special tax, so for all the homeowners. Then 30% of that revenue, the excess revenue, would go to the general fund contribution to cover the city's share, or the general fund share actually, of maintenance costs that they're providing each year. And then 30% would also be saved as reserves for unexpected repairs or additional improvements. So we're not taking everything away from the golf course as they continue to do better and have higher revenues. We're not just pulling all that away because of this revenue sharing agreement. Also, we talked about new community signage, entry monuments, sidewalks, were some of the items that were requested. So there's a picture there of a sample monument that the city got pricing for, and the monuments and signs would be about $35,000 to $40,000 in total. The sidewalks were requested for Banger and Buckthorn, and that comes at a much higher price tag than the monuments and signs. That is about $5 per square foot for a 4-foot wide sidewalk. So the total price on that there, we estimated just about 5,000 linear feet of sidewalk, and that would come to $108,000. So on the next slide, you'll see that if those items are something that we want to include, we, meaning all of you, want to include in the special tax, that would increase the annual tax rates. That amount doesn't need to be recovered. So if you decide to have the sidewalks and the monument signs, say, for a total of $140,000, $150,000, that full amount wouldn't need to be recovered the first year. That can be spread over time, but depending on which items you'd like included, that will increase the amounts. So we're at the $250 there is what we had originally shown, and that would increase to either the $275 or the $300,000, depending if we're going to do both the monuments and the sidewalks. And Sarah will go over these tax rates a little bit more later in her presentation, but I just wanted to show you those so you have that in mind, because some of you were really excited about those to be included, but that will cost more money. And then as I mentioned, these results will all be on the survey, so keep an eye out for the survey. Make sure that when you receive it, you fill it out as soon as possible, and you encourage others to do that. One of the things here I have that I didn't include is there was also a request about a discount golf program for residents. And the city worked with the golf course to determine that there is a program that can be set up that would be something like a round of golf per home once a month for all residents within the district. So that those details will be included on the survey when you decide if that's something that you would be interested in having. That would not increase the special tax amount. So that's something that the golf course would absorb, and also something that would be passed on if you sold your home to a new owner. They would be able to be in the golf program. So any properties participating in the special tax would qualify for this. So it wouldn't be with the owner or with the person, but with the property. So once again, make sure when you get the survey to fill it out and encourage as many of your neighbors to do the same so we can hear from you on those final items and what you want included. In addition to those items, we've had a lot of questions about what else the city is doing to keep the course open. The city has looked at all different angles to keep the golf course open. The following slides show what have been done to increase traffic to the course and produce increased revenue. So a lot of people ask when I get on the phone with you or in emails, you know, why don't we just raise the rates? Well, we can raise the rates, but only to an amount where people will still continue to pay to golf. So here you can see, and I'm going to read these just for the individuals that are on the phone. The weekday rates have increased from 32 to 39, so a 21% increase in the last year. Weekend rates have increased from 42 to 49, a 17% increase in the past year. Single season single passes have increased from 175 to 250. That's a 43% increase. Season family passes have increased by 51%. And then the number of season pass holders has increased from 50 to 80. So that's a 60% increase in the past year. And driving range revenue has increased from 27 to 38,000. So 36% increase in the past year. Some of these numbers, I think you went one slide too far there, Pablo. Some of these numbers we believe would be a lot better if it wasn't for COVID. You know, so it's great to see that there's movement in the right direction, even with COVID and the restrictions that have been in place because of that. So some of the other improvements are new website with pictures updated with information promoting the golf course. They've updated and expanded their email list with promotions and a new Instagram page. They have also increased the number of tournaments and outings as improvements have been made to the course. And there's been promotions that have resulted in booking of a wedding and a celebration of life. So, you know, those are, like I said, with COVID, great to see. The restaurant, banquet room, and bar have all been remodeled, and the golf shop has been remodeled as well and stocked with new items to have an increase in revenue there from 1,500 to 30,000. And finally, I know a lot of people have asked, you know, what other services are offered for children or a younger demographic in their junior classes, and player development lessons that are now being offered. So those are just some of the things that have been done to try and increase the revenue at the golf course. Ideally, the revenue would increase to a point where the special tax wasn't needed. And that's what's really important about having that revenue sharing program in there. So at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Casey to talk about the current special tax option. And, you know, I saw someone put in the chat there about a citywide. So Casey's going to go through some of that now.
Good evening, everybody. Paulo, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. So I'm going to go through real quick the history. I know last time during our presentation, I went into some detail. So I'm going to just do a very high overview. The golf course opened in 1957. It was private ownership until 2010. At that time, the city made a purchase, and this is important. The city made two purchases, one for the business, the Hesperia Golf Course, for 1.6 million. And then the second purchase, completely separate purchase, was for the water rights, 670 acre feet for 2.6 million. Now, the water rights are an important factor for the city. The reason the city made both purchases was an attempt for the golf course to ensure that, or try to ensure that there was no blight, and at the time do the best to keep the golf course open. In 2010, we started an operating agreement with the Park District, and that lasted until September 2019, when both the city and the park agreed mutually to go separate ways. At that point, the city did an RFP with Donovan Brothers, who is the current manager of the park, and it's a 5-year agreement. The one thing I want to point out real quick before we go to the next slide is the city itself does not receive tax increment for parks. It receives a city's increment, but we do not receive parks money for the golf course. So that's important to keep in mind. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. So here, what I've done here is taken the full financials from the last presentation and just broke it down really into 3 lines. Because as Rachel said, and Danielle, we're looking for a partnership. We're looking for the neighborhood to help fund the golf course. And you can see here that the golf course, these are based on our projections going out, is expected to have a loss. And then over time, with the implementation of the revenue and the course coming back and a level of play increasing, the revenues will increase, thereby driving down the expenses. You can see the total cost going across. Now, on the blue line, that's where the partnership would come in with the 250,000 CFD special tax that we're talking about tonight. And then the green line, I apologize for not having a total in there, but it should be the city share. The city last fiscal year paid 878,000 towards the golf course. We're projected to pay 930,000 this year. And you can see each year that going out, it goes from 260, it drops to 203, and then it's expected to start picking up as cost of goods increase. And that will be the city's share. And it's important to keep in mind, try to grapple on what things cost for the city. One deputy police officer costs the city approximately 275,000. So you can see that loss there is equivalent to a deputy, or a quarter-mile of road is about 500,000. Just get put in perspective of what this money means. And so that's why we're asking for a partnership here. And the one thing I will say, and I just want to put it out there so there's no surprise, is if the CFD was not successful, I would be making a recommendation to the city council to close the golf course. At this point, it's not economically viable, and as a finance director, I'd have to make that difficult recommendation. Now it's up to the city council how they would vote, but I did want to share with everybody what my recommendation would be. Paul, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. So there was some question on the water rights, and you remember I said there was 2 purchases, one for the golf course itself, and then the second is for the water rights. And here I want to kind of walk through on a very high level what that means. When the city purchased the water rights for 2.6 million, we purchased 678 acre feet of water. Through an adjudication, and that's probably a discussion for another day, but we're only allowed right now to use 407 acre feet, and that will get further ramped down to 373 acre feet. Well, if you look at that chart below, you can see that the golf course actually uses less than what it owns, but more than what it's allowed to produce. So the usage for 2017-18 was 574 acre feet. We're only allowed to use 407. We had to go out to the market and find another 167 acre feet, meaning we had a cost of 100,000. You can see each year that cost grows. And if we go to the next slide, you can see why this is important. We're discussing the concept of potable versus reclaimed water. The golf course will have reclaimed water coming to it. The city put in a pipeline. And so let's walk down the potable water cost. We have to produce that water. So that runs about 85,000 a year. What that is if anybody's been to the golf course and you go to the first hole 1, Off to the right, I believe there's a lake and a shed. That's a well and a pump. In order to draw the water from the ground, we have to pay $85,000 in electricity. We have to maintain those pumps. That's $50,000. I just showed you what the potable water costs are. So we have a total hard cost just for water, $260,000. And then we have lost revenue, because what we could do with this reclaimed water is we could sell the potable water. We could sell the acre feet each year. So we have a lost revenue of about $213,000. You can see our next year's cost just in water is $473,000. Now, if you look, our first year cost to reclaim water is $429,000. So reclaimed water actually will save the golf course money. Once we lease that water out, it will bring a revenue to the golf course and it will save us money the first year. It's important to note, as reclaimed water, more customers hook into the system, that $429 will actually drop for the golf course and it will become cheaper over time. Whereas that potable water, pulling it from the ground, will become more expensive over time. And what I just wanted to highlight some of the major costs of the golf course that the city is now paying for, and it really comes down to water costs and the reason why we went with reclaim. So with that, that kind of gives an overview of the cost and some of the questions that we had before from a financial perspective. I am going to turn the presentation over to Sarah.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Sarah Mayers. I am the director of NBS's District Formation Consulting Practice, and I am helping the city to look at the funding option, which is a community facilities district. So we'll talk a little bit about why that option is viable, where we're coming from in terms of a legislative context. We did cover some of these topics last time, so I will try to revisit them for anyone who wasn't on the last meeting or able to view the video, but try to keep those comments brief so that we can keep moving forward to make sure we have sufficient time to hear from you all. We'll talk about the general background of special financing districts, how a CFD is formed. We'll look again at those special tax rates. Danielle did share some of those with you earlier, and then we'll allow time for questions and comments. Next slide, please, Pablo. So in terms of the legislative context, we'll talk about Proposition 13, and we'll talk about the Mello-Roos Community Facilities Act of 1982. Proposition 13 was approved by voters in 1978, and it had the effect of limiting the amount of general property tax revenue, which is also called ad valorem property tax. It had the effect of limiting the amount of money the city receives on that general property tax. So it limited the amount of the value that your property is taxed based on to a 2% increase a year. So for purposes of property taxes, your value increases 2%, even though your market rate increase might be more than that if you were to sell your house or value your property through an appraisal. It also implemented a 1% rate cap on the ad valorem property tax. And so that means that the city cannot change that rate. That is a fixed rate. It is 1% based on the value of property within the city, and any other increase or additional funds that come to the city have to be voted on by registered voters or property owners, depending on the various mechanisms. This is all encapsulated in California Constitution Article 13A, and that's just a reference for you if you want more information about that particular, these particular limitations. Next slide. So in response to Proposition 13 and the limits that it placed on the ability of cities and other local government agencies to generate revenue for services and facilities, the Mello-Roos Community Facilities Act of 1982 was approved, obviously in 1982. And that tool is something that is used across the state all over. There are actually similar mechanisms in many other states as well. And what's required in a community facilities district is that we come up with a reasonable special tax methodology and way to apportion the special taxes. So it is not tied to the value of your property at all. We come up with a reasonable methodology that you all as voters would then approve and the city council would approve. In general, with a community facilities district, public property is exempt. So public property owned by, say, a school district or a city or any other type of special district would not be taxed. And you can refer to California Government Code Section 53311 and following. Again, that's just a code reference. So if you want more information about the Melrose Community Facilities Act, you have that code reference there. Next slide. So in terms of special financing districts, there are lots of different types. There are assessment districts, there are parcel taxes. Again, we're talking here about the community facilities district. It is not benefit-based. We have to come up with reasonable metrics, and we have to achieve the city's local goals and policies that they have in place, but we do not have to tie the amount of the special tax to the benefit received. In terms of approval, we are looking at a registered voter vote. And just like with any vote, votes received are counted, and we would need to have 2/3 of the registered voters approve this. There are ways that landowners can vote on a CFD, but in this case, we have a greater number of registered voters, and so that is the mechanism that would be used. In addition to things like the golf course maintenance, the list of services that can be funded with a community facilities district includes any other type of recreation program services, maintenance and lighting of parks, maintenance of property with a useful life of 5 or more years, things like public safety, libraries. Those are all things that can be funded with a community facilities district, but obviously not part of what we're talking about for the golf course. Next slide, Pablo. The CFD formation process is a multi-step process. It can be initiated either by petition of landowners or registered voters, or it can be initiated by the local agency, typically by the council members or approval of the legislative body. From that point, we would move to confirm the local goals and policies if that's something that is needed. After that, a resolution of intention would be presented to council, and the resolution of intention has a number of items included in it. It would include the proposed CFD boundary, the name of the CFD, it would describe the services to be funded, establish the rate and method of apportionment and manner of collection of the special tax. So again, what's the rate that folks are paying for the various property types, and are there tax zones as we're talking about here? It would also fix the time and place for the public hearing and describe the voting procedures. Again, voting procedures here would be a registered voter vote. After that resolution of intention, we would move on to the next step of the process, and that would be the public hearing. The public hearing would be held not less than 30 or more than 60 days after the resolution of intention. And notice would be published in the local adjudicated newspaper, just like any other public hearing that council might hold. And if there's no majority protest at the public hearing, then council would consider the resolution of formation. In the resolution of formation, the services to be funded would be approved. The party responsible for preparing the annual special tax levy would be identified. The resolution of formation also states that a lien will be recorded. And what that means is that there is a document recorded that is indexed to each of the assessor parcels within the community facilities district identifying that it is an obligation of the property owner to pay the special tax. And I think Danielle mentioned this earlier in her presentation, but should you move out of the district or sell your home, that is something that the new property owner would then be obligated to pay. It's not something that you personally owe. And in addition to that, those items, the resolution of formation would identify the recording information from the boundary map and set the election date. So after that's completed, we move on to the election step. And that would be held not less than 90 or more than 180 days after that resolution of formation and public hearing. So again, we're looking at a 2/3 registered voter vote. And voters would consider both the levy of the special tax as well as the appropriations limit or spending amount related to the CFD itself. From there, the legislative body certifies the election results, and then we would be able to commence the activities to levy and collect special taxes as well as proceed with the work. Next slide, Pablo. So at this point, again, this is not a foregone conclusion that a CFD will be formed or that this is what will happen. But should the city move forward with this process, this is the proposed schedule. So you have an idea of what we're looking at. We would be considering the resolution of intention at the first part of December 1st. We would hold the public hearing on January 19th. Ballots would be mailed shortly after that January 19th public meeting or public hearing. They're in January 2021. And election day would be April 20th of 2021. So that is proposed. It is subject to change, but that gives you an idea of what the timing looks like at this point. Next slide, please, Pablo. Well, one of the things we wanted to show you, and I will read these rates for the folks that are on the phone. If you attended the last meeting, you were able to see, or you watched the video, you were able to see that originally we had 530 parcels within the boundary of the Community Facilities District for a total of 698 units. As others have mentioned, because of feedback received from the community, we have modified that boundary to include additional parcels. So just real quickly, I will read through the rates. These are the tax rates before Zone 3 was added. So this was what was presented at the previous meeting. For single family property fronting the golf course, that would be $504 per unit previously. For single family residential not fronting the golf course, that rate was $378 previously. For apartments fronting the golf course, that was $403 per unit previously. For apartments not fronting the golf course, that was $302 per unit previously. Undeveloped property fronting the golf course was $126 per parcel previously, and undeveloped property not fronting the golf course was $101 per parcel previously.
Per year.
Can go to the next slide, and this will be the rates that are now being modeled after Zone 3 was added. So I just wanted to make that comparison for you and ensure that the folks on the phone have the context here. After Zone 3 was added, we have 761 parcels for a total of 935 units. The single family residential fronting the golf course in Zone 1 is $408 per unit. Single family residential not fronting the golf course in Zone 2, and if you've seen any of the maps on the Civic Mike website, Zone 1 is in pink, Zone 2 is in blue, and Zone 3 is in kind of an orangey color. So Zone 2, single family is $306 per unit, and single family not fronting in Zone 3 is $204 per unit. The apartments fronting the golf course in Zone 1, $327 per unit. Apartments not fronting the golf course in Zone 2, $245 per unit. Apartments not fronting in Zone 3, we actually don't have any of those, so there's no rate assigned for those. Undeveloped property fronting the golf course, it would be at $102 per parcel. Undeveloped property not fronting the golf course in zone 2 is $82 per parcel. And undeveloped not fronting in zone 3 is $41 per parcel. And I do want to make sure that you understand that these are annual rates, not monthly. This special tax would be something that is levied on your property tax bill. And with that, this is the amount that would be charged per year. Next slide,
Sarah,
Paul.
there's a question about the apartments you're referring to. They also refer to as the hotel.
I think it is referred to as the hotel. So this is the same slide that Danielle showed to you earlier. And this shows the rates that would be charged at the various budgets. We've looked at that $250,000 budget. And there are some additional improvements, those monuments, the sidewalks, et cetera, that are being considered. And what we're showing here is those rates as they would change related to those additional improvements. And I'll read a couple of the rates if anyone wants to request specific rates. Again, I just want to make sure folks on the phone are able to get this information as well. For single family that is fronting in zone 1 at the $250,000 budget level, that is a $408 annual rate. At the $275,000 budget level, it's $449 per unit. And at the $300,000 budget level, it's $490 per unit. So just to give you that comparison, again, the presentation will be available, or if anyone wants to ask for another rate specifically under the 3 different budgets, I can read those as well. And I think that that concludes my portion of the presentation, and I believe we are moving into feedback from the community, questions and answers.
Yes, thank you, Sarah and Casey. Before we start to answer the chat and phone questions, I just want to quickly go over acceptable behavior and interaction guidelines. So on the chat, please only submit your question to the chat once. We will get to it, but if you start posting it multiple times, it'll be harder for us to get through and make sure we cover everyone's. So just once, and express your own views, try not to speak for others, and listen carefully and remain open-minded, which I'm sure you all do. Do not make any personal attacks through the chat, please, and let's try and stay on track and avoid any grandstanding or anything like that. So we're going to go through those, and we'll give ourselves about 20 minutes there, and then we'll move on to the phone people just to make sure that we give everyone a chance to participate, and then read the couple the one comment that we got to read ahead of time, and then we'll go back to the chat if we don't have them all covered by that point. So Pablo,
very good.
You ready?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I think the first question is for Rachel. Instead of a hand fee of people paying for it, why don't we not everyone pay it? It will be hardly noticed.
Okay. The city received this question from a handful of our participants the last time, and it was one of the reasons and one of the suggestions to extend the boundaries from our initial proposal to the boundaries that you saw tonight. The direction that city staff was given by the city council was to pursue interest in a CFD in the community surrounding the golf course. And the idea was that that community would be the most engaged, the most invested, and the most vocally willing to share their views with us, and most, I guess, invested in the success of the golf course. And we were also open to hearing people who we're happy to consider other uses for it. So that's the direction that we were given, and that's the project that we're working. And so as Casey and I think Danielle mentioned earlier, the City of Hesperia does not have a parks department. We have a separate agency in Hesperia, the Hesperia Recreation and Park District, that is responsible for parks and recreation in our city. They receive tax increments from property tax payers that provides for those services. So the city does not have an increment. So when parks get city resident tax monies to provide services throughout the city, the City of Hesperia as an agency does not receive monies like that. So our project, we're moving forward with the direction that we were given, and we are continuing to take feedback from residents who believe that perhaps the CFD would be more successful if it was citywide. However, as I shared in the beginning, the few times over the last 33 years that we presented opportunities on the ballot to fund public safety with a tax, even when there was a sunset provision, it was not supported by the residents. So we don't necessarily feel that confident that residents would support a golf course when they were not interested in supporting public safety. But those are assumptions that we're making as well. So I hope that answers the question.
Very good. Thank you, Rachel. Casey, this may be for you. Citywide, everybody pays for the parks through the Rec and Park District distribution of taxes and assessments and so on. So why isn't the city finances, the general fund, paying for the full operation of the golf course?
Sure, it's a fair question. So as Rachel was talking about, the city does not receive park assessment when you pay your property tax. For example, the city only receives $1 of property tax paid. The city receives 1.6 cents on that dollar. The park district itself receives roughly 4.6 cents, almost 5 cents on the dollar. So the city does not receive tax increment for the from property tax. And so our property tax as city that goes into the general fund equates to just about between 600 to 650,000 annually is what we receive from everybody's property tax. Again, not enough to fund the golf course.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I'm coming down here. Sarah, this may be for you. How long will the Melrose fees last? Will it be increasing annually? And will we get a document in writing stating the time frame of the Melrose? And I guarantee that the Melrose will be removed from the property taxes. I'm assuming that is if the golf course facility closes for some other reason.
So at this point, the city is still surveying the community with respect to the term of the special tax. There has been consideration of limiting the CFD special taxes to a 5-year period. I believe Danielle discussed that a little bit earlier. There is anticipated to be a 2% annual escalator on the rates. So the rates that I showed you earlier would be for fiscal year 21-22. And then those would increase by 2% on an annual basis. And it is correct that once the community facilities district, should that be put into place and then expire, then that lien would be removed from the property. The lien actually automatically expires, but it also can be removed. So either way, it would not affect your property into the future should the special tax not be extended or renewed.
Okay, since I have you, I'll ask this other question. I like the idea of sidewalks and monument signs. However, will that additional cost only be for the first 5 years if there was a sunset, 5-year sunset?
So I think the question is asking about would the additional funds only be needed for the first 5 years to fund those monuments and sidewalks, and then they would basically fall off, and so that would only the residents would only be funding the golf course operations after that. And I believe that that is true, that the monuments and sidewalks would be funded over that 5-year period, but I would ask Casey to confirm that.
No, that's correct.
Okay. Danielle, this may be for you. Are you open to renaming the area to help elevate property values and give the area identity, like the name Hawks Ridge or something like that?
Yeah, so that's something that we talked about previously, and I know some residents have brought that idea up. And if there were going to be monuments that were put in place, and we had talked about this, the different color signs on the street signs, those items could be used to identify this area as a different community. And so you could recognize the community as you were coming into it. And so if those are items that are included in the special tax package, then yes, we would definitely have we would work with the community to get ideas for names, so we could include those on the monuments and signs. Definitely.
Okay, I'm putting the area up for one of the residents that have asked to see the zones again. I'm gonna try to, that was too much. Submitting a little bit. There are some items to address. For example, are there other income streams? Why not also have disc golf? Very popular for all ages. Casey, I'm going to depend on you on this one.
Sure.
Low cost and can also use the desert portions of the property. Also, no more scraping clear of desert areas, promotes weeds, and I believe will not allow by the herb board. Discontinue the dumping of brush into the wash and edges of the course. So there's a little bit of a lot of different topics in there.
So let me start from the bottom and then work up to the revenue streams. With the contract with Donovan Brothers, they're under strict language in the contract to address how they're supposed to maintain a golf course, and the city provides oversight to that. And they have been cleaning up some of the dumping, some of the overbrush since they've been our vendor for the past year. As far as going up to other revenue streams, I'm going to set disc golf aside. The current Donovan Brothers, as shared, has been increasing its membership. They've been trying to get golfers from outside the area. I know in their portfolio of golf course, and they have I don't have the exact number, but they manage well over 20 golf courses in Southern California. And during the summer, we were the #2 golf course. What they're doing is bringing in golfers from outside the area to golf. So they're really marketing heavy for the golfers. As far as the disc golf, I'm not too familiar with that. First thing I would say, without much research in it, and I'm really shooting from the hip here, we'd have to see how another type of use could be used with the golfers to ensure everybody's safe. It's something we'd have to look at in the future.
Very good. Thank you. Let me address these questions myself here. So one question here is, will all zones have to pay for sidewalks and signs? And I believe, Sarah, the answer is yes. The idea is that if the basic $250,000 budget special tax was increased, as shown, to $275 or $300, that will be the special tax for distributed to everybody. That's already incorporated into the various zones that we have shown. There's actually zone 1 is a higher special tax than zone 3, for example. So yeah, it will be distributed throughout. If the Miller rules is implemented, is it possible that it will be reinstated after the 5-year expiration if it had a something? So just like this time around, to be clear, the city cannot impose a special tax on anybody. In fact, the city cannot impose an assessment, and pretty much no assessments or charges of any kind these days. So after Prop 13 and Prop 218, everything has to go to some kind of a vote, quote unquote, because it differs if it's property or registered voter and there's different conditions. But if the residents were to approve this Melrose with a 5-year sunset, the Melrose will end in 5 years. And there will be a new Melrose, a new CFD form with a new rate reestablished and go through this very same process we're going today. All the same resolutions, all the same documents, all the same public hearings, and the election and all. This is another question here. I'm not sure if this was answered clearly, but I did not hear the confirmation that the Melrose fees will stop if the golf course was shut down. Sarah, you want to address that?
Yeah, so if there is nothing to maintain, meaning the golf course is closed, then yes, the special tax would cease to be levied.
Right. And I think it's worth clarifying for everybody that in a CFD, this special tax, unlike ad valorem tax where it goes to the city general fund and the city decides on how to spend it, the special tax funds can only be used for the very, very specific and limited purposes listed in the documents forming the CFD, right? So the city's it's really a special fund that Casey can only use for the golf course and whatever items were listed. So therefore, there is no improvements to maintain. There's no reason to levy the special tax. And if we have leftover funds, in fact, they will go back to the residents that paid it. Casey, has anybody approached the Rec and Parks agency to take it over? They used to own the golf course.
So as I mentioned, the Park and Recreation District served as the operator from 2010 to September 2019. At that point, the Park District approached the City of Hesperia and expressed that they were no longer interested in operating the golf course. So the city worked with the Parks District to transition over to Donovan Brothers, and now we are in a 5-year contract with Donovan Brothers. So they were the operator at one time, but due to a change of direction, they no longer want to be the operator of the golf course.
Okay. This is an interesting question. Maybe Casey, you may know the answer. I'm not familiar with this one. What about the hazards of being in the flood zone?
I would be guessing as to what the hazards would be. I don't know.
Okay, I think the implication is
address that question. It is kind of a vague question, but the flood zones in the city, the golf course is currently constructed in a wash. However, that is an approved use for that type of facility. So we could not repurpose the golf course into homes because of the hazard that is presented with the potential for flooding. But a golf course is an approved use. And so in that respect, I don't see that there's any hazard that has not been addressed in our general plan or in our hazard mitigation plan.
very good. Thank you, Rachel. There is a concern that the maintenance crew, as you mentioned, Casey, is currently maybe putting the overbrush and dead trees in the wash. Would money from the special tax funds possibly be used to maintain and clean up that area?
Actually, on that one, I am aware that the maintenance crews were cleaning up and taking care of the overbrush. If this is continuing, this is something that the city should be made or look into, and I can work with Donovan Brothers.
Okay, please make a note, and then in the chat, you'll see the question and the person who brought it up. Rachel, what would the land be if it's no longer used viable or is no longer viable as a public golf course?
Well, because of the zoning of the golf course, there's not a lot of alternate uses that are available to the city. And also, if we don't, if the residents aren't interested in supporting a CFD, there's a lot of what ifs. because if staff makes recommendation to the city council for the closure of the course, the council will still weigh in and ultimately make the decision. So hypothetically, if the golf course operations cease, we will stop maintaining the golf course. So the city, again, does not have a parks department, no tax increment to support any parks programs or facilities. So watering the course and not having play at the course would not make fiscal sense because of the cost of pumping the water and dedicating water rights or even recycled water to the course is substantial. And so without bringing in revenue from golf play, we would still be losing quite a bit of money. So alternate use would be no use. Return it to natural desert.
Thank you, Rachel. Sarah, can you cover a little bit of how you're going to have a special tax report at formation with a detailed budget, and how annually the special tax is set, and residents actually will have access to a breakdown of the costs and what the money is being used for?
Yeah, absolutely. So with the Community Facilities District, the rate that would be voted on by registered voters at the formation is the maximum special tax. So that is the most that you could be charged, subject to that 2% inflator that we've discussed that would occur on an annual basis. So that is the absolute maximum that can be charged to each property of each particular type. On an annual basis, there's a process we call a cost recovery process. And so it's really a budget setting process. We'll look at the annual special tax on a yearly basis before the property tax calculation is done and the levy is submitted to the county to include on your property tax bills. And so in that process, we look at setting the annual special tax based on the estimated costs for the upcoming year. And that is a process that we would do each year as the special tax is levied. And so should funds be needed for particular items, whether, again, our scope here is fairly limited in terms of what's being maintained. We're looking at the golf course and potentially the sidewalks and monuments. And so, with that, we would be looking at the budget for those items. We would also be bringing in, Danielle spoke of the revenue sharing agreement. So should revenues be available to share, whatever portion of those revenues are available would be applied at that time, and they would reduce what residents are paying on an annual basis. So that is a yearly process where we look at the budget and bring in any component of revenue sharing that is available and set the special taxes in that manner for the year.
Thank you, Sarah. We want to point out, Rachel and Casey, that I have several residents confirming that the branches are being left there. So please follow up on that.
I'll look into it. Like I said, I know previously the previous operator was doing that. Our contract, we have a contract, so we'll follow up with Donovan.
Thank you. It's an interesting question maybe for Rachel. Are the neighbors responsible for the cleaning of the yard to have a curb appeal that's a standard to the golf course and city?
So let me, currently there are codes in place citywide that govern acceptable standards for yard maintenance, but there's not a specific standard for this neighborhood. So I'm not sure if that was the question, or if the resident is interested in having something like that. I don't believe in any area of the city that a neighborhood has a specific requirement for a certain standard that's not applied everywhere else. So you can't have excessive trash and debris or overgrown weeds, but that's applicable citywide.
Right. And so it may be one of those questions to kind of look into further if there can be any additional specific requirements if this was to go through.
If the residents in the area, I mean, if they're looking to apply types of restrictions similar that you see in an HOA, right. It's something we can consider, get other feedback from the residents in the community. It's nothing that we've considered previously, but again, we're open to hearing what the residents want and how they vision this area maturing over the next 5, 10, 15 years and beyond.
Very good. Thank you.
Pablo,
Sarah, sorry.
Pablo, I'm sorry. Can we try and see if we can get through the next 4 that were posted on at 7:40 and then switch to try and quickly go through those, so then we can switch to the phone just to see if anyone has questions on the phone.
Okay, I'll go through the first one here real quick. So I own a residence in the blue zone but live outside of the golf course area. Do I still get to vote? The people who will vote on this CFD are registered voters within the boundaries shown here on this map that you have on the screen. So really, if where you live, it's not as important as where you're registered to vote. So if you're using the address inside of these boundaries, right, as you register voter information, that's who votes. Casey, I want to say we have not done a study at all on what the closure of the course will do to property values, correct?
No.
Any idea on what that may cost?
I'd have to look into what a study would cost.
Okay, very good. Danielle, I'll leave these other 2 for later and then send it back to you.
Okay. So now we will go ahead and open this up to everyone on the phone. We'll ask that only one person tries to speak at a time, but since you don't know who's going to speak, just go ahead and say your last name, and then we'll call on you. That way, if there's multiple people saying their last name, we'll kind of go through them. So is
Johnson.
there anyone? Okay, Johnson, go ahead.
Yes, good evening. Thank you so much for the forum. I missed the first one, and I'm sorry to miss it. I'd like to speak of 2 or 3 issues. Leave it at that, and then just get off the, no more talking for me. One is, have they considered the 9-hole golf course and everything east of Maine, not Maine, east of Peach, have a 9-hole over there. All the services that we have now, take where I live, which I happen to live on the other side, and turn it to desert flora to make it pretty. And very low maintenance water. That's one. Number 2 is, I know there is some land that is adjacent to the golf course. I believe the golf course owns, and I know some of it's considered marginal water, flood zone. Maybe those properties could be sold. The money taken and put it towards a golf course, and they could be raised like other properties that I owned before, and made them no longer in a flood zone. And flood zone costs. I think, you know what? I think I'm done with that. And I really appreciate this forum, and thank you so much.
Thank you. For the folks on the phone, you will have to hit I believe it's *6 to unmute yourself. So if you're on a telephone conference call style, classic, *6 will unmute your phone. Go ahead, Danielle.
Okay, well, did we want to, I don't know if Casey, at this point.
Address the question of Mr. Johnson, and Mr. Johnson missed our first meeting, and so in the interest of time, we didn't revisit all the things that we covered the first meeting. So you didn't have the opportunity to hear me share about our outreach that we did 10 years ago when the city purchased the golf course. Because the city is not in the parks business, When we purchased the course, we did extensive outreach to ask our residents what they wanted for the golf course, what they envisioned for that neighborhood, and how much they valued the current play and whether they would consider alternates. And so the 9-hole course was presented as an option. We presented a variety of options, and we heard from several hundred residents. We hosted a handful of outreach meetings at the golf course, here in Civic Plaza, nights, Saturdays. Residents overwhelmingly rejected the idea of having it be anything other than what it currently is. Other suggestions were 9-hole on one side and park fields or open space on the other side. I mean, it really was an overwhelming response. And so since we received that message, we've not revisited alternate uses. So
one thing, unfortunately, since this is a do or die situation, I don't know that it's the same category of a 9-hole versus nothing. And so I have a feeling that if you readdress and bring that up, I think maybe they will change their mind. You know, I'm willing to look at beautiful desert below my home, you know, and keeping the golf course, which I don't even use. So it doesn't really matter about the golf course, although there are people that do want it. And I'm very much for my city that want it. So
I appreciate that perspective, and I thank you for sharing it.
Thank you.
So I was going to jump in on the second part of the question. The city does not own all the land around the golf course. There's certain parcels that we don't own that could be developed. That those areas the city does not own. The original owner still retains them.
Thank you.
Okay, any other phone questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
My name is Javier. Going back to the question of the curb appeal, we're wondering if we're going to be paying these mellow rule for the property taxes. Is there going to be anything enforced from the people that don't maintain for the curb appeal near the golf course? Because there's a lot of people that do not maintain their houses. They have a lot of trash or abandoned vehicles and different things.
Rachel.
Well, now I'm thinking more about this question, this concern. I think that if that was important to residents and there was consensus that a support of the CFD, there would be an expectation for additional code enforcement in that community. That's something we could consider. Again, maintaining current city codes. I'm not talking about adopting new standards that would be special to this area, but if there are properties that struggle to maintain current city codes and by paying this extra CFD, there's an expectation of the residents that people really step up their game and help to really add to the charm of that community. The city would consider dedicating a portion of a code enforcement officer to those neighborhoods in a way that is not currently done. Primarily in the city right now, our code enforcement is very much responsive to complaints of neighbors. And so to dedicate some proactive code enforcement to this neighborhood would be something the city would absolutely consider.
Danielle, do you want to read that letter or comment that you received?
Sure. So we did receive one letter that was requested from Al Vogler to read here. So I'll go ahead and read that. Says, hello, I'm Al Vogler, Hesperia resident since 1972 and residing on Danbury Avenue since 1976. Hesperia City wants a parcel tax from you in the amount of several $100s a year for golf course maintenance. When you bought your golf course area, home, or lot, you already paid a premium, and you could continue to do so. Hesperia bought the golf course and water, and you have been paying for it through your taxes. It was then known that the golf course was a financial loss. The golf course water each year was to be used to pay for Hesperia's water overpumping. It was so promised. However, the promise was not kept, and the water was used instead on the golf course. Each year, the Hesperia taxpayers had to pay for the overpumping in the city water account. So you and your predecessor pay extra to be in the golf course area. You are paying each year for the golf course purchase, debt, and you're paying each year for the overpumped water. You also pay annual property taxes or rent. If the taxes passed, renters would surely pay higher rent. Enough is enough. I'm not opposed to the golf course. I am, however, greatly opposed to any new taxes in the most heavily taxed state in the United States. The Danbury Avenue taxing corridor, recently expanded, is not heaven on earth and suffers, as do some of the other areas, other nearby streets, from trash, graffiti, noise, ATVs, car racing, fireworks in your area, which burned houses down in 1979 with deaths, traffic each day from I and Danbury Avenue, burglary, armed robberies, and homicide. The city contends that your proximity to the golf course is adding value to your home, thusly wants a value-added tax. I contend the opposite is true. Hesperia has an annual budget for which they could maintain the golf course, but the priority of such maintenance is low on their list. Therefore, they wish a few hundred property owners to subsidize the golf course, even though all of the property owners in the city would benefit. There is quite a bit more to be said about the proposed Hesperia golf course tax. We hope in the future to send you information in the mail. If a tax ordinance is placed on your ballot early next year, please vote no. Remember, it takes 2/3 vote yes for the tax to pass. Thank you, Al Volker. So that's a lot. Yeah, Casey, would you like to respond to?
Yeah. So we talked about the water rights and what's going on with the reclaimed water. Before I talked about this chart that's up, with the reclaimed water project that allows the water rights that the golf course does own. The golf course could lease them to the water district, who is continually looking for water rights, and it creates a revenue for the golf course. So that's the water aspect of it. One thing I want to point out is the property tax. You can see this chart here. The city of Hesperia receives 1.6% of property tax. 98.4% of the property tax goes to other entities. Schools is 58%, the county and other districts 39%. And again, the city is 1.6. So every dollar you pay, the city gets under 2 cents of property tax back. So what does that mean? Let's put it in real values. If you take a home that's worth $350,000 and they pay their 1% tax, it's $3,500, right? The city of Hesperia will receive $56 from that $3,500 tax bill. $35 would go to the water district. And remember, we talked about special funds. That's completely separate from the city. The city cannot use that for golf course. Schools would get $2,000, just a little over $2,000 of that $3,500 tax bill. And the county would get just under $1,400. So the property tax that the citizens pay, and I'm a citizen of Hesperia as well, is we only pay 1.6%. The city receives back to the general fund that could fund the golf course. So it's important to point out what our property tax means, because we all realize how big the bill is, but most of it, 98%, goes to other entities.
And I want to point out that let me put this on mute. I want to point out that the reason we use 350,000. So the way that taxes are charged, they're based on assessed value, the county assessor's value, meaning the market value of the home may be higher, but they use assessed valuation. So I looked at the database of the 766 parcels in the boundaries of this district. 687 parcels have an assessed valuation of $350,000 or less. 687 out of 766. So 350 is a very solid number to use as an example here. It's very applicable to this community. So that means that the 1%, like Casey said, well, that 3,500, which is the standard property tax, not items that you have voted for, such as geo bonds or other assessments that have been added to the property tax. Of the 3,500, at best, $56 is going to the city in this very specific community. So that's why we use that number in this for this chart.
Thank you for that clarification, Pablo.
Yeah. Danielle, you might want to ask, I think I'm so fortunate I had to mute some people on the phone. If you can, again, if you're on the phone or you have a question, *6 will unmute you, and we have one person unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. It's regarding well, let me start by saying that in terms of property value and the return on investment, I'm fully supportive of what I consider a nominal rate increase relative to the property value at risk. My concern is specifically about who is eligible to vote on the measure.
I didn't know I was unmuted.
There you go. I'm sorry. I need that person who was speaking to unmute themselves again, please.
There you go. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Sorry about that.
No problem. So regards to who is eligible to vote, if I understood correctly, it is based on not the homeowner or the property owner, but who is registered on the registrar, the county registrar, at the addresses in the applicable zones. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so my question would be why that is the case when the homeowners are directly responsible for the tax liability. They would see the property value maintain or the loss, and the registrar does no independent validation of who is actually residing at these properties. So in my case, if I was nefarious, I could have everyone in my family register at this property. There's only a few hundred units, and it wouldn't be too difficult to manipulate the balloting system in such a way that the property owners have, although they're the key stakeholders in the outcome and they have the tax liability, they would have the lowest actual voting power. If there's any rentals, if there's old voter rolls, I'm just not sure I understand why a tenant should have any say in property tax increases when they're not responsible for it. And of course, maybe the landowner would increase the next lease amount or things like that. But I'm just not understanding why this isn't a property owner decision. And especially in terms of HOA, I don't see why the property owners, it's not a lot of money. It seems like a few $100,000 to keep the golf course the way it is. Are homeowners able to establish their own HOA?
Okay, well, that's a very, very good question. To your last question, yes, homeowners will be able to establish an HOA. To the first question, Sarah, do you want to go over why where you have to use registered voters in this particular case?
Sure. Under the Community Facilities District law, it is required that if you have 12 or more registered voters within the boundary of your community facilities district, that the approval process is by a vote of registered voters. So the city, no other agency has any say in that process. That is the process that is prescribed by law, by state law. So hands are tied really in terms of any change to that process, though I do understand your concern that this is something that is levied on the property tax bill, and yet you're having registered voters approve it. It is prescribed by state law that is the approval process for the district.
Right. Does that answer your question?
Yes, unfortunately, yes. That's all I think I had. Thanks for your time.
You bet. Thank you. Danielle?
Were there any others on the phone? We're right at 8 o'clock, and I know we have about 4 other questions in the chat. So hearing none, let's go ahead and go back to Greg's comment there in the chat. See if we can fit a couple more in here. I know we said we're going to end right at 8. There's only a few more. In the budget, it was mentioned that the extra water could be sold as future hookups. Can you elaborate on that, Casey?
Sure. So the city has a loan with the state of California, low interest loan to build the reclaimed water pipeline. Since the golf course currently is the only customer, it bears the full debt service for the pipeline. As other customers hook in, they will share that burden and the cost will decrease with that reclaimed water. So that's what I'm talking about, is as people use reclaimed water, whether it's going to be other agencies such as parks and schools, it will drop the cost burden on the golf course. Right now, the golf course is the only customer.
Okay, thank you, Casey. The next one here is from Tanya. It's a two-part question, but I think we already answered the second part. Rachel it asked about curb appeal question, if there was a way to maintain the properties, and Rachel answered that. So the first part is for sidewalk renovations. Oh goodness. For sidewalk renovations, why do the rest of the residents have to pay for it if it doesn't apply to us? I know I read earlier too on a second part of a question that I think was missed, was why do all residents need to pay for the monuments and the street signs? And I think both of those will be throughout the entire community for all parcels. But Sarah, can you answer the part about the sidewalks?
So the sidewalks are going to be areas, and Casey, maybe you can jump in terms of the renovations. Would those be only on Buckthorn and Banger, or would they be sidewalk renovations that are occurring throughout the district? Or is that yet to be determined?
I believe that the sidewalks were part of the survey response, and where they were going, and Danielle, please correct me, I believe it was yet to be determined where the sidewalks were going.
Yeah, so there was a request for them to be included in that area. I don't recall, and I'd have to go back and look if that request was so for walkability to the golf course there. I know there was some questions about that. So we'd have to see if that was a general benefit. I mean, I guess it doesn't matter from Sarah's perspective, but if it was something that needed to be spread throughout to all of the taxpayers.
I think when we set that special tax at a higher amount, we envisioned that we will have that extra ability to look at the whole district and do sidewalks wherever else it was needed. I think at the time we had these two sections that I believe we measured for to get an estimate of what it will cost, but it wasn't restricted to that area. So I don't think this question is one we can fully answer yet at this point.
Still a lot of unanswered.
Right, we got to figure out who else needs sidewalks.
And we can include that more detail on that in the survey. So
Right.
You can better be prepared to answer that question if you support it or not, knowing where they would go. Okay, Jason had a question. So sorry we couldn't fully answer that question, but we will work on getting that information. Jason had a question. Why isn't there discussion about the city absorbing the Recs and Park Department? I think they're talking about the Recs and Park District.
Yeah, you bring out a good point. The Park District actually predates the City of Hesperia. It's a completely separate government. It's not a department. Completely, they have their own elected board, their own organization. It's completely separate from the city. Rachel, you have anything to add?
Well, I don't have too much to add. I mean, why isn't there a discussion? Taking over another agency is a complex endeavor, and it's not something that any city would easily decide to do. So years ago, the town of Apple Valley decided to take over the park district there. So there is a process in place for doing that, but that would likely, not likely, it would be driven by our elected body. And hypothetically speaking, that would involve our elected body identifying perhaps a deficiency or an opportunity to better provide services to our residents. So those discussions haven't happened.
Okay, I think I skipped one here for Carrie. She was asking about, I know Sarah discussed seeing the budget on an annual basis, but this says, would we be allowed to view a spreadsheet that would show us annually where the money from this special tax goes to showing who and what is being paid for?
So that annual budget process, I'm not sure it would be a spreadsheet necessarily, but the annual budget process is something, you know, that is available. But I'm not sure if maybe the question is more about the funds and how they're spent and which vendors are being paid to provide the maintenance or something like that. So I guess I would maybe ask for clarification if that is getting more to the heart of the question as opposed to the budgeting process.
Okay, so you track everything in your accounting system, and you would be able to provide whatever reports of expenditures there are, right?
That's correct. And without going too much detail and boring everybody to sleep at 8 o'clock at night, we have audits. This would be a special fund that would be audited, and it would be highlighted in our financial statements so you can see the cost of the golf course.
Okay, yeah, Carrie's asking about saying that that's just more for transparency to the residents. And we've talked about some of those ways that the city, if this special tax was approved, would continue to keep the community involved on an annual basis, looking at some of those budget numbers and how that, or all of those budget numbers and how that money is being spent. So I think we are past our time here, but we have, someone is asking, Tanya, they did not register to vote. Can they still, they didn't receive an application to register to vote. Can they still obtain one? When is, Sarah, do you know when the deadline is to register to vote for for the special tax, when that would be?
So we're not looking at holding a special tax election until at least April of 2021. So there's plenty of time to go ahead and get registered. It's the same registration that you would register to vote for president or city council member or Proposition 15 or, you know, what have you. It is exactly the same process. So there's no additional application that the city is going to send out. It's just the standard voter registration process. But there's plenty of time to do so. I don't know specifically until we confirm what the election date is. I don't know specifically what the deadline to register would be for that election. We can certainly look at that once we get a little bit closer and have more confirmation on the timing of the election and so forth. But at this point, there's plenty of time to do that for sure.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And finally, this will be our last question of the night, just because I see some people falling off the participation list there. If the golf course becomes a park, will the city make an effort to keep it from becoming a homeless encampment? There's two parts there, I guess, for Casey or Rachel. And we moved here 31 years ago because of the golf course. Seems unfair that my house will go down in value if it becomes a park.
Yeah, I'd like to address it. We are not proposing that the golf course will become a park. So I want to clarify that. We don't really have an alternate proposal at all, other than staff may be in a position to recommend to our city council that it be closed because fiscally it is a drain on the general fund. But again, hypothetically, if the council closes golf course operations, that does not mean it becomes a park. It will be nothing, potentially. Again, these are all based on decisions that have yet to be made by others. However, with respect to homeless encampments, the city does prioritize making sure that anyone that suffers from homelessness has access to the services they need so they can get back on their feet. That continues to be true every single day. And so if there was an encampment, the city would intervene to make sure that an encampment was not established or grow or find refuge in a closed golf course, we would certainly intervene to make sure that services are offered and that there is no encampment of any sort in the area.
And Casey, can you address, because I feel like the park question has come up a lot before, and my understanding is that if this was to become a park, in case that staff was to consider making that recommendation, operating this as a park will actually be a bigger drain on the general fund, very costly, way more so than it is now. Is that correct?
That's very correct. So to maintain a park, you're maintaining the water, you're maintaining the grass, you have no revenue offset. So right now we have golfers that are offsetting some of the costs, not all of it. That's why we're asking for a partnership with the citizens. If it were a park and the city is not a park district, again, we don't receive any property taxes for park money or any of the special assessments that is on all of our citizens' tax bills that goes directly to the park, not the city. We would not have that funding. So it would actually cost the city more to have a park because, again, there's no revenue offsetting the cost.
All right, Danielle.
Okay, I think that we have answered all of the questions we had tonight, and we are at our time limit here. You know, I want to thank all of you for joining us and for all your amazing questions and comments. And we will be preparing, we'll use information from tonight's meeting to prepare that final survey and get it out to you. We'll share this presentation on civicmike.com, and any additional questions you have, you can go there, submit them to us. You can submit them via email or call the number on the back of that flyer, or we have a Facebook page, but please reach out to us if there's any other questions you have or concerns that you'd like addressed. Take the survey as soon as you can so we can get your feedback, and really just thank you again for your time, and I hope that you all have a great evening.